The rifle shot echoed across the dry wash. Smoke drifted from the barrel of the lever-action rifle. The stranger lowered the weapon, his eyes fixed on the scene before him. 22 Apache women stood in a line. Their faces were blank. Their eyes looked straight ahead. Behind them, every warrior of the tribe watched in dead silence. At the head of the line, the chief stood stone-faced. A strip of rawhide was tight in his hand. He was waiting for the stranger to choose. That was the moment the whole valley held its breath. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? To know how we got here, we need to go back. Back to where it started. Back to before it went wrong. The land around Tucson had not seen rain in 14 months. The creeks were dust. The grass was brittle and brown. Every living thing in the valley was dying of thirst, except one place, the Pike Ranch. Amos Pike had a well that went deep into the earth. Cold water came up from it all day long, clear water, enough to keep 1,000 head of cattle alive, enough to keep a man rich. Pike did not share. The homesteaders east of the valley paid his price, or they packed up and left. Most paid. The families with children paid first. Pike would stand on his porch and watch them line up with their buckets and their coins. He never smiled with his eyes. He smiled with his teeth. He liked the line. He liked what it said about the world. His world. The Apache had a spring. It had run for 100 years. A thin trickle of water that came out of a crack in the red rock. The old women of the tribe said the spring was a gift from the mountain. It would never go dry. But the drought was older than the memory of any living man. The spring was not a trickle anymore. It was a damp patch on the stone. Then it was nothing at all. Chief Naiche watched the spring die with his own eyes. He put his hand on the wet rock. He felt the last of the water soak into his palm. He looked at the faces of the children. He looked at the warriors. He looked at the sky. Then he did what a chief does. He made a decision. Amos Pike did not just control the water. He controlled the valley. The spring had kept the Apache out of his hold. Now the spring was gone. Pike saw his chance. He sent men to the Apache camp in the dark. They did not come to talk about water. They came to take horses. They came to burn shelters. And they came to take the chief's daughter. Her name was Lena, 17 years old. She had her mother's eyes and her father's silence. She fought when they grabbed her. She bit one man's hand to the bone. They beat her for it. Then they tied her across a saddle and rode out. The warriors were too few. The women were too frightened. The raid took everything. When the sun came up, the camp was ash and blood and empty silence. Chief Naiche stood in the center of what was left. He did not scream. He did not weep. He sent a runner to the ridge that overlooked Pike's ranch. The runner came back with a message. The message was simple. Pike would not talk. Pike would not bargain. Pike said the Apache had nothing he wanted, but that was a lie. Pike wanted something. He wanted them gone. He wanted them dead. And he had the water to do it. The chief had one thing left. Something Pike did not know. Deep in the canyon, under a shelf of rock, there was a pool. Rainwater from a storm 3 years ago. The chief had kept it hidden for the worst day. This was that day. He had enough water to fill 12 barrels. Clean water, cold water. He brought it out of the canyon and stood it in the center of camp. Then he sent word to every man who still rode free. The word was this: the Apache had water. They would trade it. 1 barrel for 1 life. The life of Lena. The man who brought the chief's daughter back alive would drink from that water. He would take as much as his horse could carry. That was the offer. No negotiation. No delay. The water was the payment. The price was blood. Men came. Bounty hunters, drifters, men with cold eyes and empty pockets. They looked at the water. They looked at the Apache warriors. They looked at the big house on the ridge. Most of them rode out again. They knew what they were up against. Pike's ranch had 15 armed men. It had a gate made of ironwood. It had a man on the porch with a rifle and a smile that never stopped. Silas Crane, Pike's foreman, the man who had staged the raid, the man who had dragged Lena out of the burning shelter. Men who knew his name did not ride through that gate. And then the stranger came. He rode in from the north. His horse was dark brown and coated in trail dust. He wore a light tan hat and a bright red bandana around his neck, a dark gray vest over a pale shirt, brown leather gun belt, a lever-action rifle in the saddle scabbard. He was 35 years old. He did not look at the big house first. He looked at the sky. He looked at the dying grass. He looked at the footprints in the dust that led toward the Apache camp. Then he turned his horse and followed them. The camp was quiet when he rode in. The children were gathered behind the women. The warriors stood with their arms crossed. The barrels of water were lined up in the sun. And in front of the water, Chief Naiche had put his people on display. 22 women, young women, strong women. They stood in a line with their heads up and their hands at their sides. They did not speak. They did not look away. The chief stood at the end of the line with the rawhide in his fist. He had been standing there since dawn. The stranger stopped his horse. He did not dismount. He looked at the line of women. He looked at the water. He looked at the chief. Then he counted the women. 22. His eyes moved slowly across the camp. He saw the blankets laid out on the ground. 23 blankets. One was empty. The stranger did not smile. He did not frown. He just sat his horse and breathed the dry air and let the silence stretch out like a rope pulled tight. Then he spoke. "Where is she?" The chief did not answer. The warriors watched. The women watched. The children watched. The stranger sat still. The sun was high. The dust was thick. And everyone in the camp knew that the answer to that question was locked inside Amos Pike's house on the ridge. The stranger nudged his horse forward. He was not leaving. He was going to get her. The chief finally raised his hand. He pointed at the ridge, and the whole camp heard what he said next. "Bring her back, or do not come back at all." The stranger did not answer. He sat his horse for a long moment, the chief's words still hanging in the dry air. Then he turned the dark brown horse away from the line of women. He did not look at the water again. He did not look at the warriors. He pointed his horse toward the ridge where the Pike ranch sat heavy on the land. And he rode. The valley was a dead thing under the sun. The grass cracked under the horse's hooves. Dust rose in thin clouds and settled on the stranger's boots. Every dry creek bed was a scar in the earth. The only green in the whole world was up on that ridge. A line of cottonwoods, a flash of irrigated pasture, Amos Pike's paradise in the middle of a desert he had made himself. Everyone in the valley knew his name. He had come to Tucson 10 years ago with nothing but a wagon and 2 men who would do anything he said. He found the deep water first. That was the truth of it. He didn't own the land back then. He just dug where no one else had thought to dig. When the water came up cold and clean, he filed the claim before anyone else could. That was the first day of the new Tucson. The day one man decided who would live and who would leave. The homesteaders came after, families with plows and hope. They broke the ground east of the valley. They planted crops. They built houses. And when the rains failed, they came to Pike with their coins. He sold water by the barrel. He sold it by the cup. He sold it by the hour his men let the sluice gate stay open. The price was never the same twice. He set it by how thirsty a man looked. He set it by how desperate a woman's voice got. He liked the bargaining. He liked watching them try to find something he wanted. Most of them had nothing. Most of them paid anyway. His wife, Adeline, had been a homesteader's daughter. Her father's name was Orville Ashworth. He had a claim on 100 acres of good bottomland. He had a daughter who could read and write and think. He had a pride that did not bend. Pike wanted the land. He wanted the woman more. He raised the price of water on the Ashworth place until Orville couldn't pay. Then he raised it again. Orville went dry. His crops died. His cattle dropped. Pike rode down one afternoon and made an offer, the land for the water debt, and the daughter for the forgiveness of the rest. Orville refused. He died of a fever 6 months later. Some said it was bad water. Some said it was a broken spirit. Adeline knew it was neither. She knew her father had been poisoned by silence and helplessness. Pike came to the funeral. He wore a clean black coat. He stood at her side and whispered something in her ear. No one heard what he said. But 3 days later, she married him in the big house on the ridge. She had not spoken a free word since. The Apache knew a different Pike. They knew the man who watched their spring with hungry eyes. The spring that had kept them independent. The spring that meant they never had to line up at his gate. When the drought killed it, Pike saw his chance to finish something that had been burning in him for years. He wanted the Apache gone. He wanted to be the only power in the valley. And he knew how to do it. Take the chief's daughter, take her and put her somewhere no warrior could reach. Let the tribe suffer the same fear every homesteader felt, the fear of losing what they loved most. Silas Crane led the raid. 6 men with torches and rifles. They hit the camp an hour before dawn. The horses went first, then the shelters. Then the women tried to hide the children. Crane didn't care about the children. He was looking for one face, Lena, the chief's daughter. He found her near the dry spring. She fought. He bled. He put her on a horse and rode hard for the ranch. By the time the sun hit the ridge, she was locked in a room inside Pike's house. The chief had nothing left but his dignity, and he was trading it for water. The stranger rode through the dead valley with the sun burning his neck. He passed an abandoned homestead. The door hung open. A child's rag doll lay in the dirt. He did not slow down. He kept his eyes on the cottonwoods. He knew what kind of man he was riding toward. A man who used water like a gun. A man who had taken 2 women now. One Apache, one white. Both prisoners in the same house. And on the gate of that house, a sign had been nailed up 3 days ago. It was written in Pike's own hand. The words were simple. Every person in the valley had read them. Any man who interferes with the operation of this ranch will be shot on sight. No trial, no warning. This is my land. This is my water. This is my law. The stranger read the sign as he rode past it. He did not stop. He did not turn. He just kept riding toward the gate. And somewhere up on that ridge, a man with a rifle was already watching him come. The dust on the trail was fine as flour. It rose around the stranger's horse in soft puffs, coating the dark brown hide with gray. The sun had climbed to the center of the sky. Heat shimmered off the rocks. The stranger rode slow now. He was in no hurry. He wanted to be seen. The sign was still there, nailed to a post near the bottom of the ridge. The words were fresh. The paint was still black. The stranger did not look at it again. He was looking at the thin ribbon of smoke that lifted from a draw a quarter-mile east. A chimney, a small homestead tucked into the fold of the hill. He turned his horse off the main trail and rode toward it. The place was barely holding on. The garden was a patch of cracked earth. The fence was broken in 3 places. A single mule stood in the shade of a cottonwood, too thin. The house was made of rough-cut lumber, sun-bleached and warped. On the porch, a woman stood with a bucket in her hand. She was maybe 50. Her dress was faded calico. Her hair was pulled back tight. She did not wave. She did not move. She just watched the stranger come. He stopped his horse 10 feet from the porch. He touched the brim of his light tan hat, 1 finger, a small gesture. The woman's grip on the bucket tightened. "You lost?" she asked. Her voice was dry as the dirt. "No, ma'am," the stranger said. "I'm looking for water." The woman let out a short sound, not a laugh, something older than that. "Then you're in the wrong place. Water's up on the ridge, $4 a barrel, if Pike lets you have it." The stranger dismounted. He moved slow. He looped the reins over the broken fence post. He stepped toward the porch. The woman did not back up, but she did not invite him up either. "You been paying $4 a barrel?" the stranger asked. "Paid it last month. Can't pay it this month. My mule is drinking from the mud at the bottom of the creek." She nodded toward the dry draw. "There's a patch down there still wet. For now. When that goes, the mule goes. Then I go." The stranger looked at the mule. Then he looked at the ridge. The big house was visible from here, a white shape against the blue sky. The cottonwoods around it were thick and green. Water ran somewhere up there. You could almost feel it. "What's your name?" the stranger asked. Hattie Dunmore. My husband died 3 years ago. This was his land. His grandfather broke this ground. Now Pike owns it in everything but paper. If you came here to talk about fighting him, you better turn around. Men have tried. Men are buried up there." The stranger did not turn around. He leaned one shoulder against the porch post. He looked at the bucket in her hand. Empty. She had been standing there holding an empty bucket, like she had nowhere to put it. "Tell me about his wife," he said. Hattie's eyes changed. Something flickered there. Worry or pity, maybe both. "Adeline, what about her?" "I heard she don't speak much." "Would you? Married to that man? She was an Ashworth before. They had a good piece of bottomland. Her father was a decent man. Pike broke him slow. Then he took his daughter. She's been in that house 2 years. I see her sometimes at the window. She looks out like she's watching for something that ain't coming." The stranger waited. Hattie shifted the bucket to her other hand. "She's got a good heart. She used to bring water down to the homesteads when Pike was away. Little barrels. Just enough to keep the children alive. He found out. Beat her for it. She don't come down anymore." The stranger's expression did not change. His eyes stayed cold and still, but his fingers curled once around the stock of his rifle. Just once. "There's a girl up there," Hattie said. "An Apache girl, young, maybe 17. I saw them bring her in. Silas Crane had her tied across a saddle. She was bleeding from the head. Pike took her inside the house. That was 3 days ago. Nobody's seen her since." "You sure she's in the house?" "I'm sure. I know every sound that comes down off that ridge. I heard a woman crying 2 nights ago. Not Adeline. A different voice. Younger. It stopped around midnight." The stranger looked up at the big house. The windows were dark. The porch was empty. But he knew someone was watching. He had felt the eyes on him since the moment he turned off the main trail. "How many men?" he asked. 15. Maybe more if he called in riders. Crane is the dangerous one. The rest are just hands with guns. They do what they're told. They're scared of Pike, but they're more scared of Crane." Hattie swallowed. "You're going up there, aren't you?" The stranger did not answer. He pushed off the post and walked to his horse. He checked the cinch. He adjusted the rifle in its scabbard. Every movement was calm, slow, like a man who had done this 100 times before. "Don't get yourself killed," Hattie said. "You won't help anyone dead." He mounted up. He looked down at her. His face was still. The red bandana was bright against the dust and the gray of his vest. "You got anyone who can bring you water?" he asked. "No." "Then you hold that bucket. You'll need it soon." He turned the horse back toward the trail. Hattie stood on the porch and watched him go. She did not raise her hand. She did not call out. But her knuckles were white around the handle of that empty bucket. The trail climbed. The rocks got bigger. The dust got thinner. The stranger passed a stand of dead juniper. The bark was peeling, the needles were brown. Everything on this ridge that wasn't watered by Pike's well was dying. The only green was up ahead, and the only sound was the slow clop of hooves on hard-packed earth. A man stepped out from behind a boulder. He had a rifle held across his chest. He was young, maybe 20. His face was sunburned and nervous. He didn't raise the rifle. He just stood in the trail. "That's far enough," the man said. The stranger stopped his horse. He did not reach for his gun. He just looked at the man, waited. "You the one been asking about the Apache girl?" the man said. "I'm the one." "Mr. Pike wants you to turn around. He says there's nothing for you here. He says you ride back down this trail right now and nobody gets hurt." The stranger sat still. The horse shifted under him. The sun was brutal. The young man's hands were sweating on the rifle stock. "Tell Mr. Pike I'll be at his gate in 10 minutes, the stranger said. "He won't let you in." "He will." The young man opened his mouth to speak. Then he looked at the stranger's eyes. He closed his mouth. He stepped back behind the boulder and disappeared. The stranger nudged his horse forward. The gate to the Pike Ranch was just around the next bend, and the man with the rifle on the porch was still watching. The bend opened onto a wide flat. The gate was 30 yards ahead. It was built of ironwood beams, thick as a man's thigh, set deep in the rock. A sign hung from the crossbar. Same words, same black paint. 2 men stood behind the gate with rifles across their chests. They were not nervous. They had done this before. The stranger rode straight toward them. He did not slow down. He did not call out. The horse's hooves crunched on the hardpan. One of the men shifted his weight. The other spat into the dust. "That's far enough," the man said. The stranger stopped his horse 3 feet from the gate. He looked past the men, up the long slope to the ranch house. It was whitewashed and big, with a deep porch and a row of cottonwoods behind it. Water ran somewhere close. You could smell it, green and cool on the dry wind. A man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall, with a belly that pushed against his belt. He wore a clean white shirt and a dark vest. A rifle hung loose in his right hand. He did not raise it. He leaned one shoulder against a porch post, and he smiled. Amos Pike. "I hear you've been asking about something that don't belong to you," Pike said. His voice carried clear down the slope. It was the voice of a man who had never been told no. The stranger swung down from the saddle. He moved slow. He looped the reins over a post on the outside of the gate. He stepped into the open 10 feet from the crossbar and stood with his hands at his sides. The red bandana was still against his throat. The dark gray vest was filmed with dust. His eyes were on Pike, and they did not blink. "I'm looking for a girl," the stranger said. "Apache girl, 17. Her father wants her back." Pike's smile did not change. He shifted the rifle in his hand. A second man stepped out of the house behind him, lean with a scar that ran from his ear to his jaw. Silas Crane. He carried a pistol on his hip and a knife in his belt. He stood just behind Pike's left shoulder, watching the stranger like a man watching a snake. "I got no Apache girl," Pike said. "You been lied to, ain't that right, Silas?" Crane nodded. His eyes never left the stranger. "I got a wife inside," Pike said. "I got a cook. I got a washerwoman. But I don't have any Apache girl. So you can turn that horse around and ride back down this trail. Same way you came." The stranger did not move. The sun was high. Sweat ran down the faces of the men at the gate. One of them glanced up at the porch. The other one licked his lips. "I counted the blankets," the stranger said. Pike's smile flickered. Just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. "What blankets?" "In the Apache camp. 22 women in the line. 23 blankets on the ground. One was empty. That's the girl's blanket. They laid it out for her because they expect her to come back." Pike straightened up off the post. He was not smiling now. He looked at the stranger like a man who had just found a problem he had not planned for. "You shouldn't have gone to that camp," Pike said. "Those people are thieves. They steal cattle. They poison wells. You don't know what you're walking into." "I know what I saw." A shadow moved in the window of the ranch house. A woman. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was pale. She stood behind the glass with her hands pressed flat against the frame. Adeline. She was looking at the stranger. Her eyes were wide and still and full of something that had been locked up for a long time. The stranger looked at her. 1 second. 2. She did not look away. She opened her mouth. She closed it. Then she stepped back from the window and was gone. Pike saw it. His jaw tightened. He stepped off the porch. The rifle came up, not aimed, but close. "You got 10 seconds to get back on that horse," he said. Crane pulled his pistol. The 2 men at the gate raised their rifles. The hammers clicked back loud in the dry air. 4 guns on 1 man. The stranger did not reach for his own. He just stood there with the sun on his face and the red bandana catching the light. "If there's no girl," the stranger said, "then you won't mind if I look around." Pike's eyes went hard. He raised the rifle to his shoulder. "Son, you take 1 more step toward this gate and you won't take another. This is my land, my law. You understand?" The stranger looked at the rifle barrel. He looked at Pike. He looked at the window where Adeline had stood. Then he took 1 step forward. The air went still. Every man on that slope heard the stranger's boot grind against the dirt. The sound was small, but it was louder than any gunshot. Pike's finger tightened on the trigger. Crane shifted his weight. The men at the gate looked at each other, and the stranger kept walking. What happened next, no one in that valley would have believed unless they saw it with their own eyes. The stranger's boot came down again, another step. The dust puffed up around his heel. The sound was small and dry, but every man on that slope heard it like a door slamming shut. Pike's rifle was at his shoulder now. The barrel was dead level with the stranger's chest. "Last chance," Pike said. His voice had lost the smile. It was just iron now. "You take 1 more step and I'll drop you where you stand." The stranger stopped, not because of the rifle, because of what he saw behind Pike. A flicker of movement at the corner of the ranch house. Adeline. She had come out the side door. She was pressed against the whitewashed wall, half hidden by a water barrel. Her hands were empty. Her eyes were fixed on the stranger. She shook her head once. A small, desperate motion. "Don't. Not yet." The stranger looked at her. 1 second. Then his eyes moved back to Pike. "You got 15 men up here," the stranger said. "You got water, you got guns, but you got something else too, something you can't keep." Pike's jaw tightened. "What's that?" "A 23rd blanket." Pike's finger twitched on the trigger. Crane took a half step forward. The 2 men at the gate looked at each other. The word blanket hung in the air like smoke. "You don't know what you're talking about," Pike said. "I counted them myself," the stranger said. 22 women in that line, 23 blankets on the ground. The chief is waiting. Every warrior in that camp is waiting. You think they don't know where she is?" Crane's scar pulled white against his jaw. "He's bluffing." "Am I?" The stranger tilted his head. "Then you got nothing to worry about. Open the gate." Nobody moved. The sun beat down. A horse stamped somewhere behind the barn. Water trickled in the irrigation ditch. The sound was thin and cold. Pike lowered the rifle, not in surrender, in disgust. "Get off my land," he said. "You got 10 seconds to ride out. After that, Silas puts a bullet in your back." The stranger stood still for a long moment. He looked at the gate. He looked at the men behind it. He looked at the window where Adeline had been. The glass was empty now. Then he turned his back on Amos Pike and walked to his horse. Crane laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. "That's right. Ride on, cowboy. Nobody wants you here." The stranger untied the reins. He swung up into the saddle. The leather creaked under him. The horse shifted, sensing something in the stillness. The stranger turned the animal toward the trail. He did not look back. The two men at the gate pulled the crossbar aside. The ironwood beams scraped against the posts. The gate swung open just wide enough for a horse to pass. The stranger nudged his mount forward. He rode through the opening without a word. The men stared at him as he passed. One of them spat again. The other one let out a breath he had been holding for a full minute. Pike watched from the porch. His rifle was still in his hand. His knuckles were white. Crane stood just behind him, his pistol still drawn. "He's heading down," Crane said. "Want me to follow him? Make sure he don't circle back?" "No," Pike said. "Let him go. He's nothing. Just another drifter with a big mouth." But Pike's voice was tight. He did not believe what he was saying. He had seen the stranger's eyes. He had heard the word blanket. And somewhere deep in his gut, a cold knot was forming. The stranger rode down the trail at a slow walk. The dust rose behind him. The dead juniper stood like bones along the path. The sun was still high. The heat was still brutal. He did not hurry. He was not running. He was leaving just enough time for one thing to happen. It happened at the bend, where the trail curved around a stand of brittle cottonwoods, just out of sight of the gate. A figure stepped out from behind a boulder. Not a man with a rifle. A woman. Adeline. She was breathing hard. Her dress was dusty at the hem. She had run down through the back garden and along the dry creek bed to cut him off before he reached the main trail. Her face was pale. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying. She looked at the stranger with something that had been buried for 2 years. "You came," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone would come." The stranger stopped his horse. He looked down at her. The red bandana was still bright against his throat. He did not smile. He did not speak. He waited. Adeline thrust out her hand. A scrap of cloth was clutched in her fingers. Rough weave. Apache weave. Dark brown wool with a strip of red dyed into the edge. On the back, scratched in charcoal, were 3 words and a rough shape. "Line shack. Dry creek. That's where they took her. Silas and 2 men. They moved her this morning. Pike doesn't know I know." She shoved the cloth into the stranger's hand. Her fingers were cold, despite the heat. "Why?" the stranger asked. Adeline looked up toward the big house, her jaw set. "Because I've been silent for 2 years. Because I watched my father die, and I did nothing. Because that girl in there is 17 years old, and she doesn't deserve to die in this place." She looked back at the stranger. "I saw you at the gate. You didn't flinch. You didn't beg. You just stood there. And I thought, maybe 1 man is enough." The stranger folded the cloth carefully. He tucked it inside his vest. "I'll bring her out," he said. "Bring yourself out too," Adeline said. "She's guarded. Silas Crane is dangerous. He doesn't sleep. He doesn't get drunk. He just watches." "I've handled worse." Adeline searched his face. Whatever she found there made her nod. "The dry creek runs east of the ranch, about 2 miles. The line shack is under a cutbank. You can't see it from the trail. But it's there." She stepped back. "I have to go. If Pike sees me gone—" "Go," the stranger said. She turned and ran. Back up the dry creek bed, through the dead brush, toward the garden gate. She did not look back. The stranger watched her for a moment. Then he nudged his horse forward. The scrap of cloth was a weight against his chest. He could feel the charcoal grit through the fabric. The trail opened onto the flat below. The homestead of Hattie Dunmore was a small shape in the distance. The mule was still under the cottonwood. The empty bucket was still on the porch. The stranger did not stop there. He turned east, toward the dry creek, toward the line shack. And behind him, on the ridge, Amos Pike stood on his porch and watched the dust trail until it disappeared into the heat shimmer. He did not know what had just passed between his wife and the stranger, but he knew something had shifted, something small and sharp, like a crack in the bottom of a well. He turned and walked into the house. Adeline was in the kitchen. Her face was calm. Her hands were folded in her lap. She looked up at him with eyes that gave nothing away. "Where were you?" he asked. "Right here," she said. Pike stared at her for a long time. Then he walked past her and slammed the bedroom door. Adeline did not move. But inside her chest, something that had been dead for 2 years was breathing again. The stranger rode east into the dead country. The dry creek bed cut through the flats like a scar. Nothing grew along its banks. The rocks were bleached white. The sun hammered down without mercy. He followed the curve of the creek, his eyes scanning the cut bank for any sign of the line shack. He found it in a fold of the earth where the bank rose twice the height of a man. The shack was built from rough-cut juniper logs, gray and warped. A single window, no glass. A door that hung crooked on leather hinges. And in front of that door, 3 horses stood tied to a rail. One of them was a tall roan with a silver-studded bridle, Silas Crane's horse. The stranger dismounted 100 yards out. He tied his own horse to a dead tree and checked the rifle in his hands. The lever action was smooth. The stock was warm from the sun. He pulled the red bandana up over his nose. Then he moved toward the shack. Quiet. Patient. A shadow among shadows. At the ranch on the ridge, Amos Pike was standing in his kitchen. Adeline was at the table, her hands folded, her face empty. Pike had been staring at her for a full minute. He had found the scrap of cloth. Or rather, he had noticed its absence. A piece of Apache weave that Crane had brought back from the raid. It had been in the drawer of the sideboard. Now it was gone. "Where is it?" Pike asked. Adeline looked up. "Where is what?" "The cloth. The red-striped wool. Silas brought it back from the camp. I kept it in that drawer. Now it's not there." Pike's voice was soft. That was worse than shouting. "I don't know what you're talking about," Adeline said. Pike crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. He grabbed her arm and pulled her to her feet. The chair scraped across the floor. He dragged her to the window and pointed down the slope toward the gate. "That man was here. He talked about blankets. And now a piece of Apache wool is gone from my house. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't see what you did?" Adeline did not struggle. She had learned years ago not to struggle. "I didn't do anything," she said. Pike's hand tightened. "You gave him something. You told him where to go." He shoved her toward the door. "We'll find out how much you told him." 4 of his men were on the porch. Pike pointed at 2 of them. "Take her to the spring house. Lock her in. Nobody goes near her. Nobody gives her water." He turned to the other 2. "Ride down to the homesteads, the Dunmore place, the Whitfield place, the Hargreaves place. Cut their water off. Tell them this is what happens when strangers come asking questions." The men moved. One of them grabbed Adeline by the elbow. She did not fight. She walked with them across the yard, past the garden, to the small stone building where the spring water was collected. The door was heavy. The lock was iron. They pushed her inside and slammed it shut. The bolt slid home with a sound like a bone breaking. At the dry creek, the stranger was 30 feet from the line shack. He could hear voices inside. 2 men talking. One of them laughed. The stranger crouched behind a tumble of rocks and waited. Patience was a weapon he knew how to use. The door creaked open. A man stepped out. He was young, with a patchy beard and a rifle slung over his shoulder. He walked a few steps from the shack and unbuttoned his trousers. The stranger moved before the man finished. He crossed the distance in silence. The butt of the rifle cracked against the back of the man's skull. He dropped without a sound. The stranger caught him and lowered him to the dirt. He pulled the man's pistol from his belt and tucked it into his own. Then he flattened himself against the wall beside the door. "Jeb," a voice called from inside. "You fall in a hole or what?" The stranger waited. A second man appeared in the doorway. Older, thicker. A knife scar across his forehead. He saw his companion on the ground. His hand went for his gun. The stranger stepped out and put the rifle barrel under his chin. "Don't," the stranger said. The man froze. His eyes were wide. The stranger reached down and pulled the pistol from the man's holster. He tossed it into the dirt. "Where's the girl?" The man swallowed. Sweat ran down his scarred forehead. "Inside. She's inside." "Silas Crane. Where is he?" "I don't—" The man's voice cracked. "He's coming back. He rode out to check something. He'll be back." The stranger shoved the man backward into the shack. He followed him in. The interior was dark and close. Dust hung in the air. A single cot was pushed against the far wall, and on that cot, huddled in the corner, was Lena. She was small, smaller than he had expected. Her black hair was tangled. A bruise colored her cheek. Her wrists were bound with rawhide. But her eyes were open, and they were her father's eyes. Still, watchful, unbroken. The stranger crossed the room. He knelt in front of her. "I'm here for your father," he said quietly. "He sent me to bring you home." Lena looked at him. She did not smile. She did not cry. She looked at the red bandana, at the rifle in his hand, at the two men on the ground outside. "You killed them?" she asked. Her voice was dry, hoarse from thirst. "Not all of them," the stranger said. "But if Crane comes back, he won't walk away." Lena nodded slowly. "Good. He took me from my mother's shelter. He burned it," he laughed. The stranger cut the rawhide with his knife. The bonds fell away. Her wrists were raw underneath. He helped her stand. She swayed for a moment. Then she steadied herself against the wall. "There's water on my horse," the stranger said. "Can you walk?" "I can walk, but you need to know something." Lena looked toward the door, toward the ridge. "The woman. The white woman in the big house. She helped me, brought me food, water. She told me to be quiet and wait. She said someone would come." "Adeline." "Yes, she is not like her husband. She is a prisoner too. If you leave her there, he will kill her. I heard him say it. He said if anyone came for me, he would bury her in the spring house and tell the town she ran away." The stranger's expression did not change, but his fingers tightened on the stock of the rifle. He looked at Lena. Then he looked out the door at the ridge, where the white house sat against the sky. "I'm not leaving her," he said. Lena held his gaze. Then she walked past him, out into the sun. She was barefoot. Her dress was torn, but she walked like the daughter of a chief. The stranger followed her, and somewhere in the valley below, the first homestead family was already watching their water stop. The stranger helped Lena onto his horse. She was light. He checked the horizon. Dust rose to the east. Silas Crane was coming back. The stranger moved fast. He pulled the two unconscious men behind the shack. He took their guns and threw them into the dry creek. Then he stood in the open and waited. Lena watched from behind a rock. Her eyes were hard. Crane rode in with one man. They saw the stranger. Crane's smile died. He went for his pistol. The stranger's rifle cracked once. Crane fell from the saddle. His boot caught in the stirrup. The horse dragged him 20 feet before stopping. The other man raised his hands. He was shaking. "Get down," the stranger said. "You're going to walk back to Tucson. Tell people what happened here." The man nodded fast. He ran. The stranger untied Crane's horse and slapped it away. Then he mounted his own horse. He pulled Lena up behind him. They rode hard toward the ridge. The sun was getting low. The heat was still heavy. The white ranch house stood against the red sky. At the gate, 4 men saw them coming. One of them ran for the porch. The stranger did not slow down. On the ridge behind him, shapes appeared. Dark figures on horseback. 20 warriors, Chief Naiche in front. They stopped at the crest. The chief raised his hand. Every man fell silent. They watched. The stranger stopped his horse at the gate. Lena slid down. She stood straight. She looked at the ranch house and did not blink. Amos Pike came out onto the porch. His rifle was in his hands. His face was pale. Silas Crane had not come back. He saw the Apache girl standing in his yard. He saw the warriors on the ridge. He saw the stranger with the red bandana. "You made a mistake," Pike said. His voice was thin. "I brought her back," the stranger said. "Now open the gate. Let your wife out of the spring house. This is your one chance." Pike looked at his men. They looked at the ridge. They looked at the stranger's rifle, still smoking from the shot that killed Crane. One of them dropped his gun and walked away. Then another. Pike was alone. He raised his rifle. His hands were shaking. The stranger dismounted. He walked to the gate. He did not draw his gun. He just pushed the gate open and kept walking. Pike fired. The shot went wide. The stranger kept coming. He walked straight up the steps to the porch. Pike swung the rifle like a club. The stranger caught it. He tore it from Pike's hands and threw it into the dirt. Then he grabbed Pike by the collar. He dragged him down the steps and across the yard. He threw him down at Lena's feet. "This man took you," the stranger said. "What should happen to him?" Lena looked at Pike. Then she looked up at the ridge where her father and 20 warriors watched. "Let him walk," she said, "into the desert, with no water, like he did to my people." The stranger nodded. He pulled Pike to his feet. He took the canteen from Pike's belt and poured the water into the dust. Then he pointed west, toward the dead flats where nothing grew. "Start walking," he said. Pike stumbled away. His boots scraped the hardpan. The warriors on the ridge did not move. They just watched him go, smaller and smaller, until the heat swallowed him whole. The stranger turned to the spring house. He broke the lock with the butt of his rifle. Adeline stepped out. She was pale. Her lips were cracked, but her eyes were clear. She looked at the empty yard, at the open gate, at Lena standing free. "It's over," the stranger said. Adeline nodded. She did not cry. She walked to the well and drew a bucket of water. She drank. Then she handed the cup to Lena. The 2 women stood together in the fading light. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. The sun was almost gone. The ridge glowed red. The warriors sat motionless on their horses. Chief Naiche looked down at the yard. He saw his daughter. She was barefoot. Her dress was torn, but she was standing. Lena walked toward the ridge. She did not run. She did not wave. She walked with the same stillness her father carried. Halfway up the slope, she stopped. She raised her hand. The chief raised his. No words. None were needed. The stranger stood by the well. His rifle was still in his hands. He worked the lever. The empty shell from Silas Crane's death flipped into the dust. He slid the rifle into the saddle scabbard. He had no more shots to fire. Adeline was at the spring house. She had pulled the broken lock from the door. She held it in her hand, like something she had wanted to throw for years. Then she let it fall. It clanked against the stone. She walked to the big house. She did not look back at the yard. She went inside. The stranger waited. He did not follow her. He knew she had to do this alone. A moment passed. Then Adeline came back out. She was holding a folded paper, thick, cream-colored, with a red wax seal. The deed to the well. The paper that had given Amos Pike power over 50 miles of desert. She walked to the well. She set the paper on the stone rim. Then she looked down the slope at the homesteads below. The Whitfield place was dark. The Hargreaves place was silent. The Dunmore cabin had an empty bucket on its porch and a mule that had not moved all day. Their water had been cut off. They would be thirsty by now. They would be afraid. Adeline looked at the stranger. "They need to see this." The stranger nodded. He mounted his horse. He nudged the animal down the slope at a slow walk. Adeline walked beside him. The dust was soft. The air was cooling. At the Dunmore cabin, Hattie Dunmore was standing on her porch. She saw them coming. Her face was worn. Her hands were cracked. She had not had water for hours. She watched the stranger stop his horse. She watched the woman in the dusty dress walk up to her gate. "Mrs. Dunmore," Adeline said, "I'm sorry for everything. This stops now." She held up the deed. Hattie squinted at it. "What's that?" "The well," Adeline said. "It doesn't belong to one man anymore. It belongs to everyone who lives in this valley, homesteader and Apache alike. I'm putting it in writing. Tonight." Hattie stared at her. She did not smile. She had learned not to trust promises from the big house. But she saw the stranger. She saw the red bandana. He was the man who had come through her gate hours ago. He had asked for water she couldn't give. Now he had brought it back. "Who are you?" Hattie asked him. The stranger didn't answer. He just looked toward the Whitfield and Hargreaves places. "Get the others," he said. "Meet at the well." Hattie nodded. She picked up her bucket. She walked toward the other homesteads. The stranger and Adeline turned back up the slope. At the well, Adeline unfolded the deed. She read it once. Her husband's name was on it, his signature, his seal. She looked at it for a long time. Then she picked up a piece of charcoal from the fire pit. She scratched a line through Amos Pike's name. She wrote beneath it, "This water is free, for all families, for all people, by my hand, Adeline Pike." She signed it. She pressed her thumb into the charcoal dust and left a print beside her name. Then she set the deed on the stone. The homesteaders arrived. Hattie Dunmore came first, then Ezra Whitfield, a thin man with 3 children trailing behind him. Then Cora Hargreaves, a widow who had been carrying water 3 miles every day from a seep that barely trickled. They gathered around the well. They read the paper. They looked at Adeline. "It's real?" Ezra asked. "It's real," Adeline said. "The ranch will pump the water. No price. No threat. If anyone comes to take it from you, you show them this paper." Cora Hargreaves put her hand on the stone rim. She was crying. She did not make a sound. Her lips were cracked. Her eyes were wet. She looked at the stranger. He was still on his horse. He had not spoken. He was watching the ridge. Up on the crest, Chief Naiche had dismounted. Lena was standing in front of him. He placed his hand on her head. He said something in Apache. The warriors behind him lowered their lances. One of them raised a water skin and poured a stream of water into the dust. It was a sign. The war was over. The chief walked down the slope. He stopped at the well. He looked at the paper. He did not read English, but he understood what Adeline had done. He looked at her. Then he looked at the stranger. "You brought her back," the chief said. His voice was low. "You chose nothing. You gave everything." "You knew I would," the stranger said. The chief nodded slowly. "The women were witnesses. That was the purpose, so all my people would know her face, and know the man who carried her home." He gestured toward the warriors on the ridge. "They will tell this story. A white man in a red cloth came for our daughter. He did not take water. He gave it back." The stranger said nothing. He looked at Lena. She was drinking from a cup. Her hands were steady. Her face was calm. She caught his eye and nodded once. That was enough. Adeline stepped forward. She tore the deed in two, not to destroy it, to give half to the homesteaders and half to the chief. "Keep this," she said. "Both of you. If anyone doubts what happened here, you show them this." Hattie took one half. The chief took the other. The paper looked small in his hand, but it was heavier than a rifle. The stranger pulled his canteen from the saddle. He went to the well. The pump handle was cold. He worked it 3 times. Water came out, clear, clean, cold. He filled his canteen. He drank. The water tasted like stone and sky, like the end of something long. He put the canteen away. He looked at the people standing around the well, the homesteaders, the Apache, the woman who had been silent for 2 years. They were not thanking him. They were not cheering. They were just standing there, together, in the dusk, with water running free. The stranger turned his horse. He did not say goodbye. He did not wait for thanks. He nudged the animal forward. The hooves made soft sounds on the hardpan. The red bandana was still bright around his throat. It was the last thing they saw as he rode north. The horse, the rifle, the red cloth against the gray vest, and the dust settling behind him. No one spoke his name. No one knew it to speak. The chief watched him go. Lena stood beside her father. Adeline held the pump handle. Hattie Dunmore clutched the torn deed. The children of Ezra Whitfield were drinking from the bucket. The well kept pumping. The water kept flowing. And the stranger became a shape on the dark horizon. Then he was gone. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.